Scott, are you there, Scott?
Yeah, I'm here, Joanna.
Just so you know that I was sharing my screen, and then for some reason when you got on, I'm no longer able to share. So when you get a chance, if you give me those access to sharing the screen, I'd appreciate it.
Should be good. Gary?
There we are.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Oh, good. Okay.
looks like Michelle is not here yet. Is Steve?
I don't see Steve. I know Michelle is planning on attending. So I did speak to Michelle. I know she's planning on attending via Zoom, so we could probably just give her another minute. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Pretty good, for a rainy Thursday.
I know. I know it's such a rainy day. They always bum me out. I was saying earlier that I was eating lunch and I was saying to some colleagues, every time it rains like this, I always wonder, like, what do people in England feel like when it rains so much? Or if I lived in Seattle, like if I lived in the Pacific Northwest, what would I feel like, Hi, Gary. How are you?
I was, a little story, I was in Ireland and it rained the whole time I was there. It was kind of like this day, little rain, little drizzle, this, that.
Mhm.
Every day I was there. And it was kind of cool. And I was flying back and I was sitting next to this woman who had been there for a year. And she was saying, I got the best weather of the whole year.
Nice.
That's how it stays so green, Gary.
Yep, it was green.
I'll tell you, Trish, you ask about London. Outside Abbey Road Studios, there's a webcam, and I actually have it bookmarked, I must confess. And so I will periodically tap into that, allowing for the 5-hour difference. It's aimed at the street crossing where the Abbey Road album cover photo was taken, you know, the four Beatles walking across the crossing. It's from the other direction, but it's funny. First of all, you do get to see what the weather in London is.
Right.
But that's a regular road, and there's traffic up and down it all the time, on the wrong side of the road, of course. But there's traffic up and down it, and you have all these annoying tourists who are there with their phone cameras, wanting to take pictures of their friends walking across the crossing like the Beatles. And they're out there in the middle with these London taxis trying to get through the intersection. So, but you do find out it is kind of gray and rainy over there a lot.
But if I were there, I would be one of those tourists. I'd be walking just like them. The picture in Abbey Road. All right, Joanna, I think we have everyone. So I don't know if you want to put the screen share up and we can like zoom on into a really fabulous opportunity. The policy, we all love policy.
Sounds like
So, you know, I will need some like helpful reminders because unfortunately I left last month's policy packet at the townhouse. So I do see that policies 5005, 5300 and 5302 are revisions. I think they're policies we have gone through, but we had some revisions to those. But I'm not sure if I'm correct on that. And I was hoping, Joanna, you could remind us, or Dave, what we were revising. So our first one is 5005, inspection, operation, and maintenance of facilities. Now it's indicating this is a revision, revised. Is that just indicating, Joanna, the addition of the blue language, or was this a policy we previously sent back?
So yes, this was a policy that David updated, and I believe it is everything that he has underlined.
Okay. Okay. Yep.
I think the question also came up about whether, I'm trying to find it, did we have the right title in here for who was going to be doing this? You know, some of the duties in here.
Yes.
Yeah, and when I read, I mean, at least in the new language, the process makes sense of the DS soliciting from department supervisors and principals, their in feedback, and then that in turn going to staff. And I didn't know if Chris and Scott, if you had a chance to see if there were any from the supervisors, any questions about this policy in particular. Anyone? Bueller?
Yep. That would have been that input that we gave the last time. Because remember, we got the input from the supervisors on this policy, and I think that's why it went back for revision. So that would have already been considered.
Okay. So I have no questions then about this policy. I read through it. All of it made sense. I was good with that. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions on this.
I'm all set.
Just two quick ones. Inspections, page 2 of 3. Item 4 or number 4. Administration shall keep the board informed of the results of inspections in a timely fashion. It's probably happened, but I just don't have recollections of this happening.
Yeah,
Where are you? I'm sorry.
Page 2.
Page 2.
Under Roman numeral 4.
Or, yeah.
You know, Gary, I wonder about that too, because like, so there's a fire, usually typically people come through and they do fire inspections regularly. Bus wouldn't apply to us. Asbestos not typically, unless you're going through like a project or something.
Yeah.
Boiler inspections would be pretty standard. I think they're like every few years, but the fire is a regular one.
It's a yearly thing. And
yeah.
I remember being notified of this when it happened, but not lately. Not in a while. And maybe it is, and I'm just, kind kind of
Maybe maybe it's
goes by.
something we're supposed to do, and right here in a live stream, I'm gonna say, I don't know that we have, because like you, I don't recall this.
Mhm.
So I don't object to it being in policy, but we have to make sure it's turning around in
Yeah.
procedure, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a note on this for procedure. We have to revisit this. But I think it's good to go as policy unless there's any objections.
No, but one other question, and it's just the last item, 6. I'll cross off the faculty report cards. Facility report cards, sorry.
Yep,
I remember there was a big doo-hoo that we had do individual budgets for each school, facility. Is that because that's gone? We're not doing that anymore?
go ahead, Dave.
I was just gonna say the strike through, right, was because we went back and checking the legal reference. This was not a requirement any further.
And
But
also,
is it that when I'm trying to say what that was, that there was a thing came through a couple years ago
yeah,
that we had to do individual budgets for each. Have they thrown that out? It was a big to-do when it happened.
yeah, okay, so I think I know what you're talking about. So I think what you're talking about was that you had to have a submission, or it was an additional submission to the governor's offices for budgets by building code, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't really related to facilities in general. It was just that in addition to districts submitting budget reports to SED, the governor was asking that each school district have to submit a budget by building. And it was to show things like where more money was being spent. So I'll give a quick example to make sure that we're on the same page. You might have a lot of senior teachers in one of your elementary school buildings.
Yeah, no, I understand the whole issue.
Yeah,
I
okay,
was just kind of thinking if this is related to it.
it's not.
Okay, that's all.
And I think, Gary, you don't really need the facilities report cards, because if you look on page 2 of the policy, well, it actually starts at the bottom of page 1, the planning part. You have to have a plan that you're visiting annually, and you also have to have the 5-year facilities plan.
Right.
So I think both of those really negate the need for that facility report card.
Okay. I
Okay,
was just hoping that whole
yeah,
breaking the budgets went away.
okay, yep, no, different thing. All
Okay,
right, so are we okay to move 5005 forward as policy?
good to go.
Good to go. All right, like that. Good to go. So now we're on internet safety policy 5300. Dave, the revisions here, I saw the removal of the glossary at the bottom regarding the terms obscene. And instead, is it the back page where we have the appendix A?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, also, I think I think those were on the table at our last session, and what we wanted to do was have cross references to a couple of applicable other policies, and you'll see now we have cross references to the code of conduct and the purpose, use, and administration of the digital information system. Which are interlinked, the purposes of which are interlinked with this. So I think that's what we did from last session to this session.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I had no questions about that.
So
Yeah.
pretty well aligned then to the code of conduct, right? Because I don't see any major changes, nothing.
Is that Michelle?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hi.
Hi.
That was one of my notes from before, was aligning it to the code of conduct, but I feel like there's nothing that has changed. So it was pretty well aligned, correct? Already?
Well, that's right. There's really the internet safety plan, internet safety policy originates with your E-rate application and the requirements of some federal law. And it doesn't really say anything about what our behavior expectations have to be. Those are over in the code of conduct, and they are addressed in the code of conduct. So by adding that cross references, that cross-reference at the end, we made that linkage explicit rather than just kind of hanging out there.
Sure. Okay, good.
Okay, are we good to go on 5300? I'm good, good? All right,
Yeah.
good to go.
Mhm.
And we are on 5302, usage of surveillance security cameras at Oneida, Herkimer, Madison, Boces, removal of the word surveillance.
Mhm.
And that was the only change that you folks requested from when we looked at this the last time, and so Vera's gone through and made that revision, that language revision throughout the policy. Other than that, it's what we showed you last time.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Just a quick question. I think we touched on it before, but on the last page, what is that, 7?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. To keep by OHM Boces for 3 years, the videos, that's A, sorry, skipping around. Is that long enough?
Yeah, that was actually my question here. I got, how long does someone have to file a complaint? Written down here. And this was started in 2004 when storage was an issue. Really shouldn't be an issue anymore.
Because I just feel like litigations and problems, they come up when you're not expecting them to come up, you know?
Yeah, you know what? That's right. And Dave, is it 7 years or is it up to 21 years? Isn't there a term where people can go back?
Okay, a couple of thoughts. Yes, I mean, if I've been injured in school as a minor, right, I get a certain period of time after I get to age 21. So there is that. To Gary's point about storage, I don't, and I certainly defer to Chris and Scott on this, but the security systems do have limited, do have limited storage. In fact, most of the ones I've been familiar with or dealt with tend to record over themselves after a certain period of time. And so what this is about, you know, we're not keeping, you see it says 2 weeks. If nothing is going on in the picture, nothing's going on camera, we're just keeping it 2 weeks and probably recording over it at that point. And it's when there's a call out, when we've had for example, code of conduct incident, there's been a student suspension or some other incident that's brought our attention to the need to preserve a certain imagery, then yes, it allows for the 3 years. That is certainly open to a longer period of time if that would make BOCES more comfortable. But generally within the 3 years, you're probably going to know if something's going to happen. But I agree, litigation can come up years and years later.
I mean, Scott, do you anticipate it being challenging to try to keep digital recordings for any specific period of time beyond the 3 years?
No, typically what happens when there's an incident on campus, that's taken off of the system and put onto a USB drive, given to the appropriate administrator. I'll be honest with you, I don't know if we've ever talked about an administrator having to hold that for 3 years. Or SPO or SRO, whoever gets that footage. I know we certainly have well more than 2 weeks of recording going on right now anyway, but that 3-year piece is interesting.
So if we were to extend it, we'll have to create a procedure around it. The only other question I have is, so imagine that, so if it doesn't matter if it says, in terms of the ability to store, if it doesn't matter if it's 3 or more than 3, we probably should extend the time period so we can be protected in litigation the best that the technology stands up to it. The other question I have is, and this is probably procedure, but we're also looking at this policy, is that if we see an incident on camera and we download it, that procedure for sharing that information is PII, correct? Potentially?
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, it's a little wonky what the feds are saying about video these days, but as to an incident, it would be considered for FERPA purposes, PII, an education record of the student or students who were involved in the incident. So if it's a bus video or a hallway video, two kids mixing it up, it's really an education record of each of those kids. The kids in the background who are watching and cheering for one or the other, it's not an education record of them. But that is something we need to keep an eye on. And for 2D purposes, also, you talk about letting SROs or SPOs have this information. We have to have the 2D language in our contract with those guys too. But yeah, we need to treat it as an education record. If we've kept it because of an incident, then it's presumably an education record of somebody in that incident.
My suggestion on this is to keep the policy as is, but think about changing procedure if that starts to make sense to you.
Yeah.
You know, this way you don't get yourself committed to saving it and it doesn't really exist.
Well, it's true, right? So if we keep it at 3 years and procedurally we are keeping it even longer than that, the policy doesn't prohibit us from doing so.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Gary. I think that's just smart advice. But we have to develop a procedure, and we also have to make sure, I'm just taking notes because I wanted to go plus 3 years and also consider PII. Okay.
There's one other thing that I had, and it's in page 2, item 5, viewing, that we're under no circumstance will the Boces video recording or duplicated be removed from OHM Boces without a subpoena. I'm wondering if we want to be that structured about it. And again, just bringing up the question, not wanting to change the policy. But just in general, do we want to, if law enforcement wants video, do we have to make them get a subpoena to get it?
Well, I'll put my school attorney hat on for a minute and say absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
They don't like to hear that, but it is a record of a student under FERPA, and there's no law enforcement exception to FERPA, unfortunately.
Okay.
That the other thing that happens is two kids have mixed it up in the hall, and the parents of student A come in and say, I want that. I want a copy of that because I think it proves my kid didn't start the fight.
Right, yeah.
And it's also a record, of course, of student B. And we're not supposed to give them a copy. This is where the feds are right now. We can let them see the video, but we are not supposed to give them a copy of the video unless we have permission from the parents of student B.
Correct.
So this was just to kind of put it in there and put our administrators on notice that we've got to be really careful about who we share that imagery with.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. 5302, good to go?
Yep.
Yep.
Right, good to go. Let me write that down. Good. Good to go. So we're on 5100 AEDs, the AED policy. Chris, you have questions on this policy? Were there questions?
Yeah, there was a couple. Notice of intent to provide PAD, not sure what PAD stands for. Roman numeral 7, written notice is B.
Oh, yeah.
Where are you?
Page 3. Roman numeral number 6. Letter B as in boy. The Boces will file a copy of the notice of intent to provide pad,
Where are you?
page 3, Roman numeral 6, written notices, letter B as in boy.
Okay.
Oh, highlighted right there, perfect. Notice of intent to provide pad, it's a DOH notification.
Be honest with you, I don't recall what that is, but it's a Department of Health form. It's New York State Department of Health form.
I'm guessing if it's a requirement, we have to do it, so it should stand in policy, and we just have to figure out what that is and have it available. Right, so I mean, there's the information for the Mid-State Regional Emergency Medical Services Council. We probably can get the DOH form. But I had thought it was a requirement. We were gonna have to figure it out. I don't think it's something we're volunteering to put in. Dave, do you know if this is a required process? Because I'm sure off the top of your head, you happen to have, you know, the legal requirements surrounding AED. units.
Okay, it's a notice of intent to provide public access defibrillation.
Oh, yeah, okay, yep.
Form on the New York State Department of Health website. And it's to be filed by the entity that's providing public access defibrillation.
Yep. So I don't take issue with having to do it. We just have to make sure we actually do it.
Yep.
So I didn't have any.
Yeah, and I think that's why this was put in the packet as a new policy, because I think we learned that there are the AEDs in use over there, and we didn't have a policy, you know, underlying that. So this is based on the template that we had put out a while back when this came into being with school districts.
Is it necessary for us to put, like, we have, I mean, I don't, the name of the actual emergency healthcare provider, does that have to be stated in policy? Or is that more procedural? It says we have to identify a physician or hospital knowledgeable and experienced with emergency cardiac care. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm on page 3, number 4, letter A, right? So it's saying we have to enter it we have to identify that ECHS. And it does say the school physician normally can be that person. And then it says we have to enter into a collaborative agreement with that person. And it indicates here we have to name that in policy. I just thought that was a little odd because that, you know, we do a reorg every year. And right now that person's been pretty steady Eddie for us, but that could actually change. So is there any thought on that, whether or not that is appropriate to policy, or can just Roman numeral 4 letter A stand? And then letter C, if that identity changes, we have to enter into a new agreement, right?
Well, I'm
And we have to submit that to the Mid-State. So I just didn't know about putting the actual name of the.
yeah, the Regional Emergency Medical Services Council. I think there's regional emergency medical services councils around the state, which are tapped into the New York State Department of Health system.
And that's mentioned, so that should stand. But what about letter B, Dave? Do we have to put the name of our? So that would be the name of our school physician in letter B. And I just think that, so we contract that through Slocum Dixon. But that can change, and we renew that at every reorg. So I just thought it was odd to put the name of that provider in actual policy.
Oh, I see. Okay, you're up in 4B.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we Roman numeral number 4, if we keep letter A, which says we have to enter into a contract with a healthcare provider, and we keep letter C, which says if we change the healthcare provider, we have to re-up a new contract and register that with Mid-State. Do we need to keep B as in boy at all there?
I'll have to look into that. I'll have to go back and check.
Because otherwise we'll
How
have to at every
specific it is.
reorg possibly revisit this policy, and then we have to maintain this note that, to check it
Yep.
every year. Okay. That was the only question I had. Were there any other questions on this policy?
If we're gonna oh, sorry, go ahead, Gary.
No, I've got on page 2, item 3, AED requirements. We have to ensure the presence of at least one staff person. And it's for school-sponsored events, but the fact of the matter is this building is used for all kinds of things. And if we got somebody else in, yeah, you got all that too. If you got some group, non-school affiliated come through here, do we need a staff member here? And if so, who pays for that person?
I think the answer to that is if this is a group who through your community use or public use of school facilities has signed up to hold a meeting, and that, they have to certify that they've got the insurance coverage or, whatever your policy
Yes.
says. I don't recall at the moment, but that's not a school sponsored event.
Right.
Okay, and obviously the reference to athletic events is a little anomalous when we're dealing with
Right.
BOCES, but for other extracurricular events or activities that would be part of or an offshoot from our instructional program, if we have an open house, for example, at CTE, that it would apply to that, I would suggest, but not to where we've allowed I don't know, the Scouts group to come in and have their meeting.
Even though, does that qualify though? So I like that example, the Scouts. So if we look at number 1, right there at the bottom of the page that Joanna has up, whenever an instructional school facility is used for either a school event or a school approved extracurricular event or activity. So if, as the DS, if I'm signing off on the use of the facility for the Boy Scouts, is that the school approving this extracurricular? Although, is it not an extracurricular because it's not tied to our organization, so it doesn't fall in that category? That's how I look at it, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I think you look at factors like, we don't appoint a faculty moderator for the New Hartford Boy Scouts. They don't even call themselves Boy Scouts anymore, but
Oh, really?
but if it's a group that we're running under the extra classroom activities policy, we've got, student officers and a faculty moderator. I think that's where your test is.
Yeah, and so, when we do have events, we most likely, if there are events, or like say SBI might be an example, then we'd have to make sure that, we have our own people at those and that they'd be able or trained in how to use an AED. But those would have, like if we were hosting SBI here, there's a chance that one of us are here at that. So I guess we'd have to be careful to be aware of that. And I'm also wondering, what about custodial staff? Because they're here every day. I wonder if this is something where we're just going to have to, as part of the opening day trainings, show everybody how to use an AED. But I don't know if that leaves us with contractual obligations.
Here's the definition in the commissioner's regulations: school sponsored or school approved curricular or extracurricular events or activities means events or activities of a school district, Board of Cooperative Educational Services, etc., that are associated with its instructional curriculum or otherwise offered to its students.
Okay.
And while some BOCES students may be part of the Scouts, we aren't typically offering that as an activity of the BOCES.
Well, my thought here is continuing ed,
Well, there is staff people there, right? So you're right, the adult ed programs, and those are staffed. So Madison, we share that, well, you already know that the Madison Boces has a person here at night. There's like an on-site administrator for that program.
And they're paying for it. Continuing ed is paying for it.
Yep, it comes out of our budget, BCCE budget. So, but what we'll have to do is make sure like everyone is trained, right? We're gonna have to do something. It's not AED training is not terribly difficult, but with the way this policy stands is we're probably gonna have to add this to opening day trainings and some other trainings where we know there are people who know how to use these machines.
On a voluntary basis, I mean, because who wants to be doing this if they're not a medically trained human being, you know?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think that that goes into the territory of labor law to figure out. I don't think it should prohibit us from having the policy if it's required, right? We're gonna have to do it.
Right.
And then we're gonna have to figure out how that's done. And I think that's when it's a labor discussion. I don't know, Dave, what do you think? Is that kind of how we should break it down, at least in terms of policy?
Yeah, been a while since this came out and we had to figure all this stuff out. So, and it does talk about trained personnel, but you know, it doesn't address the voluntary or not.
Would that cover like SROs or nurses? Like during our normal typical school day, we would have nurse on staff, we would have SROs on staff, or do we use SROs, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I
Yeah.
get those acronyms confused, but you know, they'd already sort of be trained in their profession and use them. So maybe it's not as difficult a task.
They're pretty
Well-
self-explanatory how to use them. Like you open it up and it's, you know,
Don't shock
how
yourself.
to do it. Yeah. But I guess my question was, it looks as though when you read this, that's a requirement. Like we don't have a choice.
Right.
So I think in terms of saying this policy is good to go, we don't have a choice on this. So yep, good to go. But then we have to make sure internally that we have a procedure for this to make sure that we have trained people on staff, and the voluntary nature or not might fall in the category of labor and negotiations. But I think in terms of this policy, I don't think we can remove that requirement.
Right. No, I know we can't, but it's implementing it is trickier than it sounds.
Yeah.
So do we table this until we have more details as to who we're targeting or who we're going to ask to do this?
I don't think so. I think we go ahead and approve it, then backtrack to make sure we're following it.
Yeah.
Well, also, I mean, I think we're proposing this because we got the information that you guys, in fact, have these things deployed. And if that's the case, what have we been doing?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think we table it. I think we protect ourselves with the policy. And then we internally have to sit down, and basically what I'm going to do is say to Scott Morris and Chris Hill, okay, guys, we have to figure out how to do this. And they might end up calling Dave Pello to say, okay, from a labor perspective.
Trust me, I've been through this. This is trickier than it seems.
Yeah, I
The
think
school
you're right.
use especially in Boces is a little more formal in how that gets used, but the schools are very ad hoc at people wandering in and out.
Mhm.
You know, I think usually in those, in a school district, because there is athletic programs, many of the coaches, again, I don't know how formal, to Gary's point, I don't know how formal it is in any given district, but coaches tend to be, have at least somebody, assistant coach or whatever, that's been through the training at least.
It's
Yeah, you'll get
connected to
a
every CPR.
Yeah,
right, and you'll get a suggestion from an employee that, you know, if you want me to take this training, I should get a stipend for it.
yeah, and it's true, because I know that when we had teams, we even had AEDs that had to be out on the field, right? Like they had to be within proximity of the field. So
That's correct.
you're right that this could be a little different for us, right, than for a school, but we've got to be able to find a way to solve the issue, you know.
Mhm.
So I'm writing down.
We're good during the day. It's the
Yeah.
after hours that we got to really look into, but during the day, we're covered pretty well.
Yeah, it's the after hours that become problems. You know, like at the school board, got somebody,
Yeah.
got somebody here. I think you do, but you have to now. You know, it's kind of a requirement. If we're done with that, you got item 3 there with all the blanks.
Okay, Gary, we can't hear you, or at least I can't hear you. It's all very gargled.
You know, say how many units we got and where they're.
Yeah, so Gary, we're losing you.
Okay, Gary, we can't hear you, or at least I can't hear you. It's all very gargled.
Yeah, I just shut off VO to see if that
Oh.
does it help.
If you're talking right now and you're not delayed, it's
Okay.
excellent. I can hear you.
Hold on 1 second. I'll come back.
Okay,
I know what happened.
okay. Okay, so aside from the question, I had the question about naming the physician, and we had a question about having somebody there who's trained at night. Were there any other questions? Scott or Chris, do we have questions about this?
Second shift was an issue, right, for custodial that we're gonna have to address.
Yep. Right, so I wrote down a procedure. We're gonna have to meet to talk about a procedure for mandated training, having somebody there at night, on the nights where we have an extracurricular or verified event, right, that we're hosting. Anything else about the feedback on this policy, Chris or Scott or Michelle or Dave?
I'm good.
Okay. All right, so I say we move forward, and then when, oh, Gary, you're hooked back up. I was gonna say, if he has something, we can come back. Gary, are you good on this policy now, or do you have any more questions? And can you hear me? Gary?
I hear you.
Okay, you're really frozen still. You might want to undo your camera. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna say 5100 is good to go. And we're on 5307, which is the PII. I actually thought I was pretty good with this one.
Could I just, Trish, one comment back on the 5100. There is a blank in there where we're supposed to designate how many we've got and where they are. And I'm pretty sure that again is a requirement, but I'll confirm that when I try to confirm whether we need to specifically identify the emergency provider.
Okay, well, if that's, so if we're waiting on that, that will not be good to go. What we'll do is we'll table, because we're waiting to hear back about AED locations and medical provider, right?
Yeah.
And that's number 5100. So 5100 is not good to go, Joanna. That one's going to come back at us. It's going to come back. All right, so we are on PII. What questions do we have about that policy? It's pretty beefy. Beefy.
I'm fine with it.
So the only question I had about it, and I think it answers itself, but I want to make sure it answers itself. So on page 10 in Roman numeral number 8, which goes on for quite a bit of time, it's all about reported breaches, right? So it says data subjects and other staff who have information indicating there's been a breach, right? Have to forward that on, and then the breach gets addressed. And then it goes on to say on page 11, letter E, little letter E, on page 11, that once the fact-finding process is complete, we have to provide the reporting party with the findings. So I was like, okay, so if I'm an employee and I've discovered a breach and I let Scott Morris know, like, hey, we've had a breach and the whole fact finding thing goes up, we're required to email back that employee to say, hey, here's all the stuff from our fact finding of the investigation. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
And the only defense I can offer, Dr. Kilburn, is that the language is derived, the description of the process there in 3 is taken right from the regulations that were adopted by, well, by the commissioner, but by the chief privacy officer at SED. You know, I think that, well, we wrote up that anybody who's got information, including a staff member, should report it. I think that the regulations were generally prepared from the point of view that a parent's going to be the one coming forward and complaining. That a data subject, a parent's going to come forward and say their kid's information they think has been improperly disclosed.
So is there a way, so, okay, so here's my wondering. We get a notification that there's been some kind of breach. Maybe it's from a parent or maybe it's from a staff, right?
Right.
And as part of the fact finding, there are details in there that might be pertinent to the security of our own network systems. Are we able to redact such things from a report back to the person who filed the report with us? Because that could be putting our systems in jeopardy.
Well, remember, the fact finding is to determine whether there's been a breach or unauthorized disclosure. So that's a basic fact.
Yep.
And the scope, meaning how much stuff went out, if any stuff went out, or what was seen, if any stuff was seen. And how it occurred. In other words,
okay,
if
so
the
it's pretty
teacher
basic.
gets to you and says, I think there's been unauthorized disclosure because I sent an email
Yep.
about little Davy Pello in 3rd grade, but I copied the wrong family on it. Well, there you go. And that's not going to be a terribly technical thing. That's not going to get Scott Morris and his side of the house too involved. It happened or it didn't. But I think otherwise, if there truly is something where we've got to drill down, whether it's at the Boces level or Boces working with the Regional Information Center, yeah, there is an interest in not disclosing information that would let the bad guys know things we don't want them to know, right? I mean, that's why the comptroller, when they do an audit, puts some stuff in the public report and some stuff
In the letter,
in a private letter. But that would be, this process is pretty much a direct copy from what the chief privacy officer has in the regs. So.
Well, I mean, just the way you described it regarding the scope, the fact that there was like a breach and to what extent, you know, the type of information that was breached, that's more doable, right? Than I was just thinking about any other particulars. So, okay, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't somehow exposing ourselves to something we shouldn't be.
It's an appropriate sensitivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was it. That was my only question regarding this policy. Were there other questions regarding this policy? Scott, Chris, Michelle, Gary?
No, I'm good.
Dave, I think the parent Bill of Rights needs to be updated in there. I think we also need to include links to the supplemental information of the contracts that we have with vendors.
Right. Well, this policy, I'm trying to find the language on the Parents' Bill of Rights. Yeah, okay. You know, at the board level, you'll see we just have a pretty basic statement of policy. We have a Parents' Bill of Rights. We publish it the way we're supposed to. We'll include the elements that are required. All right, so then we go on and we have the specific elements that are, again, taken out of the regs, taken from the regs. Yeah, I don't like the way that part's written. You're absolutely right that there are a lot of posted Parents' Bill of Rights out there that need to be updated with supplemental information, and I'm not sure where you guys have gotten to with that.
I think we just need, to update
Oh,
our,
shall include links to
Yeah.
the following supplemental information. Yeah, so that's saying we will be putting the supplemental information up there. I don't know. Have we done it or have we not done it? I think I know the answer to that question because most districts have not done it.
Yep. So that would be an in-house thing where we have to go look at what we got on the website and potentially
Now-
update that with the links. Yep.
We can, we can omit that in the adopted policy, but it's still going to be a legal requirement out there that it get done.
Yeah, the problem is if it's a legal requirement that's pertinent to this policy and we don't have it in the policy, we could end up missing unless we're going to carry around a thing of school law because it's not represented somewhere else, like in our contracts or.
Right.
Right.
And that's why we kind of baked it in. We tried to cover all the 2D obligations that a school district has somehow in this policy. So it could read as at least a quick manual, if you will, or handbook to what's got to be done.
So the Parent Bill of Rights and the links, right,
Right. What?
have to align to this policy.
So if you've got a contract with vendor A, you got contracts with vendors A, B, C, and D, then there needs to be 4 chunks of supplemental information that tells the parent community what we're using this product for.
Yeah.
Now, the ones that are being accessed through the Regional Information Center, through a contract the Regional Information Center has, we posted supplemental information over here. And we had at least verbal agreement with the Chief Privacy Officer, the last Chief Privacy Officer, that would be, that our theory that satisfied the requirement for all the school districts using our contract was correct. So
Oh,
it would
good.
just be the ones that OHM Boces gets into directly.
so we do have that. We do have that.
Good, that's great. Do you have the county sheriff up there, Scott? Because you got the SROs and the SPOs, and that should be a 2D contract.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, Chris.
Yeah.
I don't think you can speak to that, but
I think isn't there a 2D? Chris, do you know off the top of your head? Where is Chris? I can't see him anymore. He must be on another screen.
Check for which?
SPO,
For our SROs and our SPOs,
Yep.
yeah, we have it, but I don't know that we don't have it posted though, but we do have 2D we have it on almost everything we do now on the backs. Okay. All right, so I have a list that's more like a to-do for us to work on to make sure that we just have everything linked up there correctly. But I have no objections to this policy as it stands. Are there any objections or questions before we move forward?
Nope.
Okay, so I
Not
think,
good.
okay, good to go on 5307. We are on 5400 transportation of students. I did have a question. And I felt like I was reading, I think I felt like I was in like this endless loop trying to figure this one out. Roman numeral 2, letter C. It says employee use of a vehicle that is not owned or leased by the BOCES to transport students is prohibited, which tells me I can't use my car. Okay. Except in an event of emergency. Okay, so I can use my car. The district superintendent or assistant superintendent may approve incidental limited use of a vehicle that's neither owned nor leased of the BOCES to transport a student. So I can use my car? So does it mean if I need to use my car, I've got to have approval to use it, except in an emergency where I can use it without that approval?
Oh, I think we got an extra comma in there. I think that what we're trying to say is except that in the event of an emergency, the district superintendent or assistant superintendent can approve it.
Okay. So take out that comma, and now the whole thing makes more sense. Do you want to make sure that's really real before we commit to the loss of that comma? Because it does change the meaning significantly.
I can double check with Vera how that came about, but I'm about 98% certain that that's a punctuation issue rather than a content issue.
Okay, so we have to revise to remove comma.
All right, so 5,400.
And that may also address one of the supervisor's concerns that B and C contradict each other there. You know, because in C it says employee use of a vehicle that's not owned is prohibited. And in B, they define volunteer drivers that are. So there was some concern there that there was some, but I think you may have solved it because it's about emergencies.
Okay. You know, the volunteer driver stuff, you know, I did have a question about that too. Do you remember when we were trying to look at the bus policy, even though we don't have bus drivers?
Yeah.
And there was the thing about you had up to about 30 days before the drug testing requirement would kick in. So I thought that might be tied to this, Dave, except that here, it kind of rules out someone who's employed as a bus driver or employed to regularly drive. So I had thought, and maybe I was wrong, but I thought like if we had employees and we were successfully negotiating in a contract for this, and I'm not saying that. So if someone's watching the live stream, I'm not saying that we're doing it. But so imagine we were asking some staff to transport some students in a Boces vehicle on a field trip regularly, or drive them, you know, to their homes because their buses weren't working, and we agreed to help out. I thought there was, under the volunteer rule, we could have up to 30 days for them to do it before we'd have to initiate the mandatory drug testing. But the way the policy is written, I think it would prohibit even that, because it says may not be anyone who's employed. Oh, it would be okay, because as long as you're not employed on a full-time basis, right, as a driver, we're okay to do that.
Right. That again, that last sentence is clumsy. And also usually when we have something clumsy like that, like a reference to a minister, makes no sense in this context. So that tells me that's a sentence we took right out of the regulation or the statute someplace. Because a lot of the volunteer driver, that's not a school or ed law concept. That's a Department of Motor Vehicles concept. And their concern often is that church volunteer who's taking, you know, kids to a program, whatever. That's why the ministers keep getting folded back in. But yeah, it's not going to include somebody whose job basically is driving.
Okay, but it will allow then. So if we have a staff person whose job is not driving, but they agree to transport children for a time, not in a bus, we would be able to get them covered for up to like 29 days before drug testing would kick in.
Right. You got a CTE situation where you got 3 kids need to go to a job placement for, you know, 2 days a week for 3 weeks or something.
Yep.
So we get a driver, we get a teaching assistant or teacher aide to do that maybe. And right, as long as you stay under that count, we're okay.
Okay. All right. That's what I just wanted to make sure, because we had talked about that last time and I was like, okay, I thought we would be covered if that ever happened. And the other thing too, I had a question about was page 2. It's really letter A, which starts on page 1. And it's about like we're transporting kids. Again, we don't typically do that ever. And then the parent wants to say, hey, I went on this trip and I'm going to take my child home with me. They don't need to go back on the bus, or they don't need to go back with Boces, right? And they're supposed to sign a note. This allows them to sign a note to go home with another student's family too, correct? If I'm reading this right. So the parent's like, my child's going to go home with Tim Johnson's family, and that's okay per this policy. It's fine if the answer is yes. I just want to be clear about that, my own understanding.
No, it's a good question. I was just, it says unless the parent guardian participates in such event, which again is not something we made up.
Yeah.
I would say in practice, though, that if we get a note that says little Davy can go home with, Samantha's parents, and I'm signing off as little Davy's parent or guardian, that's okay.
All right. Well, I don't want to change the policy. This is a little more restrictive. That might actually not be a bad thing. And we don't really transport kids, so I don't want to belabor a point. That was just for my own understanding. So I'm good with the policy, with the change of the comma. I'm good with policy 5400.
I'll confirm that and see if there's anything else in our notes about why that reads the way it does.
Okay, so we're going to bring this back with a change of comma. Thank God, the power of the comma, right?
That's right.
Don't
Let's
underestimate that little guy. It's like a pawn on a chessboard.
Let's eat, Grandma.
Let's eat, Grandma. Okay, so I think we're moving on from 5400 onto 5401.
All right. Sorry, I did have a question on 5400.
Oh, sorry, Gary, go ahead.
Right at the beginning here on number 1, in the underlined portion, it says well, it's continuing of a line, but it goes on underlined, transportation of students to HM Boces sponsored events and students providing their own transportation. And nothing in this policy applies to students providing their own transportation. So
It
it's
does
just a little,
in the end, number 4 on the back page, number 2, on page 2, Roman numeral 4.
okay. That's the only thing it applies to?
Yeah, because you know what, that was, if you look at 5401. Oh, no, not that one. 5402, the one being recommended for deletion, actually has the same exact paragraph. So they're moving it out of 5402 and merging it into 5400.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
they're trying to combine the whole thing,
Yep.
but it only applies to paragraph 4 or section 4.
Yep.
No, that's all right.
Okay, and I'm hoping, Gary, I'm getting it correctly because there's still that little bit of a delay, but I think we did a clarification for Gary. And this is going to go back for revision of the amazing comma. And then it's going to come back to us. Okay, so I'm going to take silence as consent. And Gary, I apologize. I'm having about a technical difficulty.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Okay, I didn't catch it, but I'm thinking it's fine. Okay. 5401. Oh, good. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Gary. 5401. Owned or leased vehicles. Any questions about this policy? Oh, you know what? I did want to check that.
And I think that's just a continuation of the one you've had in place since '02.
Yeah, there's nothing new on that. That was just a review. I don't think that was the new policy. So I'm fine with it. Are we good to go on that policy?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Okay, 5401 is good to go. And that brings us to 5402 would be deleted because it's reflected in 5400. Any objections to deleting 5402?
Dr. Milburn, I think 5401, there is something that needs to be updated. It's just my title.
Oh. Oh, yeah. Look at that. In Roman numeral 5, the assistant superintendent for, we have to take out administrative and put support. Good catch, Mr. Morris. Nicely done.
All right, I got it.
Okay, so we're going to revise. Let me just put this through.
You could have ducked that responsibility, Scott, but you just gave it to yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, 5402, we're good with deleting, and that brings us to flag display 5500. Any questions about this policy? I had none.
No, also,
Chris, do we have flags in each classroom?
We do, well, some, not, probably not all, but some flags, like, just with all some are using virtual flags. I mean, we do pledge every day, but I'm sure we bought them at one time, but I haven't taken an inventory in a while.
Was that a question pertinent to the policy, or just, were you just curious, Scott?
In the feedback from the supervisors, some of them said that they did not have flags. We're
Okay.
using virtual flags, so I was just curious if that's something we need to address or not.
I'll just say that the policy, and this is coming, you won't be surprised probably to hear from a state law passed like in the 50s. It's just what it says in Roman numeral 1 there, which is, you got to have a flag near your buildings.
Yeah.
Near each building. So it doesn't regulate what we do in the classroom. It certainly would be traditional to have one in the building. It's funny, I went down to a school district for negotiations earlier this week, and I got there, it was the start of school, and I walk into the district office before the superintendent even comes out to see me. All of a sudden, the loudspeaker comes on, and the two administrative people, the district clerk and the superintendent secretary, stand up and turn around to face the flag and get their hand over their heart to recite the pledge, like you're saying every day. So
Yeah.
it's certainly part of our school culture, but it would not be directly addressed by the law, and therefore the policy.
So I think we might need some flags for the classrooms, but the policy should be good to go as it is.
agreed.
Agreed. All right, we're feeling good about it. Look at that, good to go. Which means, ladies and gents, we have commenced another amazing and fascinating meeting of the policy committee.
So I have a question for the.
Question. Oh,
I have
Dave,
a
go
question
ahead.
for the
Yes, Dave.
question for the policy committee, and that is, where do we go next? Let me tell you, two alternative routes. Continuing the audit, I checked with Vera. We would be sending out to Joanna the section 3000s, and this would be the end of the 5000s, and apparently the schedule set up at the beginning of the year was to go to the 3000s next.
Okay.
However, we are showing in our, if you will, inventory that there are 8 to 10 policies which in the past have been sent in draft form and set aside, tabled, whatever, for further review. In some cases, I think in these cases, for some more input at the Boces level. Maybe we'll find a couple of them are at our end and
Oh, yeah, we should probably do that.
So
Yep.
the question Vera had was whether you want to see a list of those and a packet of those before we go on to the next section, the 3000s.
I think what would be helpful is, can you send Joanna a list of what those ones are? So I can go through them, because if there was stuff that we need to go back into the organization to get information for, we can do that in advance of going to the policy board and then having to table it and go baback into the organization, right? So without knowing what they are, let's do that.
I
Joanna?
know there was a couple that we were waiting on contracts, tenure, and there was another one that we were waiting on. So I know that some of the contracts have passed, so that we might be able to continue those.
Yep.
There's one that I don't really want to see come back. I just would like to leave it tabled for a while. I'm sure some of us recall my passionate speech at our meeting one evening.
So
we could leave that tabled, I think.
why don't we do this? If Dave can get a list of those policies to Joanna, I would say send them to me. I mean, you can CC everybody in there so everybody can see what these policies are. But if you send them to me, what I'll do is make sure to go through them with Scott and Chris to figure out what do we need from the organization before we move it up to the policy, and we can give our recommendations to the policy committee about what to move on or what still needs more information for? Does
And I
that?
believe, I believe I have notes on all of those that
Okay.
we're waiting on. So I'll, once I get the list, I'll update it and send it on to you.
Okay.
All right, I'll have Vera figure out what we think at our end is hanging, and then, but it sounds like we should also go ahead, come up with our recommendations for the three. I don't remember how many are in the section 3000. Not too many, I don't think. It might be one or two doses of section 3000. So we'll get a batch suitable for consideration by the committee out of the section 3000.
That's perfect. Yeah, that way we keep keep things moving, keep the momentum going.
Okay.
Wait, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So there's something in our handbook that doesn't necessarily align with Tricia's contract. So is that a policy? Do we explore that during policy, or where do we align that?
So that would be probably if it's, I'm thinking you might be talking about the timeline of my evaluation.
Right, yeah.
Right. So that's procedure. It's not policy, and it's part of my contract, but the timeline isn't. So I don't think we need to have a contract conversation. It probably really is a procedure that we can determine among the board and then just update it in your handbook.
Okay.
And then the other thing is this. Dave, Dave, I don't know if you can answer this because it might be an attorney hat. So I'm just going to talk to the board about this. And if you can answer it, that's great. So the timeline on in-person on Zoom meetings, right, is kind of ticking away for board. And we are running this as an open meeting. We're live streamed right now. So I guess my question will be in the future is if we have to do this in person, and maybe Zoom people in, or if we can continue this in a Zoom environment. And it is open right now. Anyone can watch it. We're all Zooming. It seems to work for us pretty well. And I'm thinking because there's no vote that's ever taken by this group, this might be an appropriate format, but I am wondering about this with open meetings law and the changes to that. So I'm going to be to the policy committee, just looking in to get some answers on how we can move forward and in what format, in person or virtual. And Dave, I don't know if that's the right hat that you can wear in this meeting. So I don't know if you can chime in on this or if this is a phone call for later on.
Well, no, it's at least in broad strokes, when the emergency permissions pass away, we will be left with two alternative procedures in the public officers law, in the open meeting law. One is the one that's always been there, that talks about how a video conference can be conducted. And the other one is the new, more detailed process that was added to the law a couple months ago to take effect. I don't remember what the effective date is. 90 days from passage, I think it was. So the new procedure has a bunch of requirements, including a requirement that there actually still be a physical meeting with a quorum. The other procedure that had been there for a number of years, pre-COVID, stated that wherever you had a board member accessing from remotely, that had to be basically treated as a public place. So if I'm on a board of education in the Acme School District and I happen to be at my condo at Hilton Head and we're going to have a meeting, I could Zoom into that meeting as long as the public notice of the meeting told everybody they could go to my condo in Hilton Head and, sit in the living room if they wanted to watch that meeting. And that bothers some people and it doesn't bother other people to run that way. So the Q&A that has come out, the FAQ that has come out from the Committee on Open Government said that because the legislature added a new section to the law, they see that old section of the law still being in effect and still being available as a process. So the board might want to talk through more about what those two procedures are. But if they want to adopt the new approach, they will have to adopt a policy for it. And that's why I'm answering this on a policy call.
Ah, see, that makes sense. So when we talk about a quorum for a group like this, you'll notice that we have two board members here. Would it would mean that like one of them would have to be present in the physical location?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, Trish, what the answer to that is. I don't recall an FAQ that addresses, it got down into that sort of granularity
Yeah.
of subcommittee meetings and things. So that's one of the things that we probably have to explore before advising you or any other district on how to set it up.
Okay. All right. So just so the group knows that, that's kind of a little bit that we have to kick around regarding how we convene as the policy committee meeting. But it seems like we might be close to the end of this one, and it is always a pleasure to meet with all of you. I enjoy our meetings, and I know that you just look forward to them every single month. Just the highlight, I'm sure. So I'm ready to say goodbye. If you're all ready to say goodbye.
Okay, bye.
See you
Thank
later.
you.
Have a
I
good
just
one.
wanted to,
Yep.
I just
Okay.
wanted to say something to Michelle, that I've sent you an email. If you could respond to it, I'd appreciate it. While the meeting was going on, I sent you an email.
I like the multitasking there, Gary. I'll look at it.
Passing
Okay.
notes in class, Gary.
All right. Well, I'm going to hit the red button, folks, and